Welcome to the Gourds and Pomegranates podcast, talking common sense for church communications. Here's Hannah and Joe.
So we're back with part 2 of our comms plan episode. In part 1, we looked at what a communications plan is. We looked at the importance of starting from a place of prayer and getting buy-in from your church leaders. And then we went on to thinking about your goals, your audience, and what to actually say by putting together different content ideas. So right up front, we'll say if you haven't already listened to that episode, go back and listen to it now. It's a very practical thing. We're taking you through step by step. So it doesn't really make too much sense coming in halfway. If you have listened to that, then enjoy the episode.
So one thing to mention is, though we covered the different types of content in terms of topics, this will likely take place and delivered in different forms. So we mentioned about sharing testimonies from people in your church, but within that, so that's like one content idea. Actually, you could have it in a text post that could be long form, short form. It could be just a quote. You could have a video of a whole interview or kind of several short clips to form sound bites together. So, you know, we might have a screenshot of graphics with quotes over the top or a whole blog post. There's so many different ways that you could actually deliver one type of idea. And this is something that you might often hear called content repurposing. And again, don't be daunted by this. We will talk about this in a lot more detail at some point in the future episodes. We can't really go into detail with it, otherwise this episode would be far longer than it already is. And again, a reminder that you will need to sort of practically do your comms plan. It will take longer than we will talk for during the episode. So don't think that you have to kind of scribble everything as we're talking. Have a listen through first to understand what you need to do. Then go back, you know, to part 1 and then this one of part 2. Listen again, taking breaks to do all the different sections and really complete them sort of comprehensively, and you know what you're doing.
Absolutely. So let's go on to step 4, and that is platforms or content platforms. So we will often talk about online, websites, social media. Of course, content platforms include more than just digital. Anywhere that you're communicating as a church, anywhere that you're going to be present is a content platform and a different way that you can put your message out there. It's important to be realistic with your platforms. You know, practically, if you're a one-person comms machine, it's probably going to be unsustainable to be on every communication platform that you've ever come across. And that's completely fine. For me, I always come from this position of doing less, but doing it better. At the same time, don't feel the need to limit yourself. Just because other churches do or don't use a platform, and that could be well or badly, that doesn't mean that you have to.
Yeah. And the first and probably the most important place to really look at if you're choosing where you need to be is your website and mailing list. These are your platforms, your spaces that you own. It's often sort of content creators, when they talk about this, it's like it's your land. You're not renting off someone else. And, you know, you pretty much have full creative control on what you can do there, as opposed to on other more public platforms where you're kind of restricted to the type of content and the delivery of it.
Absolutely.
And in order to do your website and mailing list, you need to get your domain or web address. And don't overthink it or try to be funny or sort of clever in doing, like, picking your letters and name and stuff. Have a clear church name, possibly even include your town name, but keep it short so that it can be easily included in other publicity. You don't want kind of like a really long one that then if you're including other pages, it just sort of is like 2 lines long to actually see it. When you do share it out, don't feel you have to include the full https://www.part. People know that that's what is included in a website. And actually, say if your website was www.churchexample.co.uk, even if you just include churchexample.co.uk, putting that in a search bar will come up with your website. You don't need to include the www.bit.
Yep, we don't need to spoon feed people with that. They'll get it.
No.
So talking about the website then, we will absolutely go into more detail about this in the future, how to make best use of your website. It's something that's very close to my heart in that it's my full-time job. But briefly, I think the first thing to say is that generally there is a place on your website for almost everything that you need to say about your church. Every bit of information has its place, but that place is not the homepage. If we put everything front and center, if we try and give everything equal weighting, and I've seen churches do it so much, it just serves to confuse and frustrate your users, especially with your menu at the top of the site. If you have one as part of your design, you don't need to have everything in it. Less is more, and it will serve your users better. So think about prioritizing your content on the site. What's the most important thing? If someone came to look at your site for the first time and they could only take away one message, what would that be? But the church website is one of the hardest things to get right, because you'll want to target all of the segments of your audience that we thought about in part one. It is the most universal communication platform, like the central hub of the wheel. But that's no excuse for not prioritizing messaging and in considering your audience and their needs. And please remember, put your service times somewhere obvious. Okay, Sundays aren't the only part of church life, but they are important. And generally it's information that users are searching for when they come to your website. So it baffles me when churches forget to include their service times or hide them away somewhere that users might not be able to find them. I see it far too often.
Yeah, or if there's any changes, so for example, like with the pandemic, or if there's Christmas or something, and then people don't put them up there if there's a change, and then people go on a day, nothing's there. Oh, well, no, we're all off this week. And
and practically we'll go on to think about the way that we actually put these plans into force. But any information that can go out of date on your website, you need to be aware of it, and you need to have a note of when it's going out of date so that you can update it. Because if information is out of date, it's useless to people. It's obvious to say, but it also gives a negative impression that you don't care about, essentially about their time, because you're giving them outdated information. And the last thing to say about the website is true of all the different platforms that were mentioned, and that's include lots of photos of your church, and that means pictures of people. Avoid terrible stock photography. Choose your photos carefully, but photos can, it's a cliche, but they speak 1,000 words. They can give a really good idea of what your church is like. So the next thing to talk about is email. And your email list is a really fantastic opportunity to share internally with your church family, or if you have a public newsletter, then something that can be an external source of communication as well. You can go into lots of detail here. You have people's attention, so you can share lots of things in one place. Email might seem a little bit old-fashioned, but realistically, everyone uses it to a greater or lesser extent, not least because to be on any social platform or to have an account on pretty much any website, you generally need an email address. So email can still be a really important part of your communications efforts. It's a shortcut right into people's inboxes, right into the information that they are actively consuming. Unlike with other platforms like on social media, where it might not even be presented to your audience and it's more of a fight to grab their attention.
Definitely.
So it's a really powerful tool, but also it's important to use email sparingly. Don't overdo it, or people will begin to phase out your messages. If you are sending more than 2 or 3 times a week, I'd really consider slimming those down. And again, use relevant imagery, but keep your content short, sharp, and to the point. An email usually isn't a place for a massive block of long-form text. So why not have a brief intro and then link to a blog post on your website for the full content? And blogs themselves are another separate platform, really, and that needs fuller attention. But if we go into detail with everything like that, we'll be here until next week. So I think the last thing to say for now with email is about having different lists. If you're using a tool like MailChimp, Sendinblue or similar, then you can tag your contacts, or you can sort them into completely separate mailing lists. And this is to say that not every email has to go to every person that's on your list. So you can target messages to the people for whom the content is going to be relevant.
Definitely. And then sort of the more broader places to share content is obviously social media, and again that encompasses so many different platforms and audience types, but generally I'll cover kind of the major ones. When thinking about what platform to use, consider who you've reflected upon in your audience avatars and the communities that you want to reach out to. In the first instance, I think Facebook is probably one of the best places to start. Generally, most people have a Facebook account, so you are likely to reach the most amount of people, but also actually the scope of opportunities, resources, and actually features within the platform is greater than any other. At the moment, there's always changes, but generally Facebook is probably one of the best places to start if you're deciding in the first instance, what platform should I use? Twitter is a good platform if you're wanting to connect with local businesses, your local council, national organisations or individuals of influence. And particularly if you're in an urban area, it's a great platform of trying to just connect with as many people as possible. It's short, sharp content, so it's great if you know that you've got a lot to share out, but generally it's not so good in just building community with those that aren't particularly active with online. Instagram is popular with most generations, but it is more visual and content driven sharing rather than kind of strong community building. But it is great if you have a lot of, again, visual or video content that you want to share out. And stories at Reel are a really great feature to make use of. But if you don't have either the resources or the staff to take a lot of visual and think strategically in that way, it's probably not the best, but it's great in terms of engaging with especially the younger generations. YouTube, again, is one of the ones that really you should be thinking about having as soon as you start. I'm guessing that most churches got a YouTube account or set up a YouTube channel during the pandemic. But remember to not just share a Sunday service. It's a great place if you've got testimonies to share or other things that, worship sessions or compiling playlists. It's a great platform for answering the questions that a lot of people have. It is the second most used search engine, I think. So don't just share a Sunday service, create other content to go in there as well. And then for the sort of the last of the big platforms that most people are using now is TikTok. And I know a lot of probably older generations will roll their eyes slightly at that. And it is great if you have younger generations, but it actually isn't exclusively used by that. Now, there are a lot of non-native users to digital who are starting to use it. And it's a really fantastic tool to utilize short form video. But you do need to stand out with being creative and consistent with it. So if you've got the time, you've got the people to use it, that's great. And you can do some really powerful stuff on it. But it's worth just exploring in the first instance. And the thing is with all of them is that you do need to experiment and try them. You won't know if they do or they don't work if you don't actually try them. And that can be just individually to begin with. It's great to just start out using the platform like within your own personal profile, seeing how they work, seeing how people use them, seeing what's being created in them. There's nothing wrong with after a few months saying, actually, this isn't sort of going to be a major platform within our strategy for us. But at least you'll know rather than not trying it and never really knowing. And you never know, by going into a platform, you might find a whole new mission field that you can engage with. And as well, it's better to have all of the platforms on hand and with a consistent handle rather than having to pull together something when you decide to try it. So sort of set up a Twitter account, set up an Instagram account, set up a TikTok account. You don't need to be active on them. You don't need to be posting, but at least you've got an account with the handle of @ChurchExample London or wherever. At least you've got it when you decide that actually it is something that we want to experiment with, rather than sort of not doing anything and then in a couple of years going, actually, no, let's try TikTok, and your name is taken. So you have to kind of do London Church Example Community or something, and then actually it's really tricky to build that consistent brand across all of them.
Yeah. And one thing that strikes me just today as we're thinking about these different platforms, it wasn't that long ago that we would have said of Instagram, that's where the young people are. If you want to reach your youth, then go to Instagram. But actually now TikTok is a bit more of that place, but not exclusively. And we don't have to go much further back before that, where Facebook was the place where the young people were, and it wasn't where it is now in terms of every generation being on there. So these things do change over time. We can only reflect on what we see at the moment. But obviously, these are all online things that we've mentioned on the platform so far. As we've alluded to, communications isn't just digital. So thinking of the platforms offline as well, posters and flyers can be really helpful. Obviously, posters are more in place, whereas flyers, things that you can give out to people, whether that's doing a mail drop, whether that is knocking on people's doors, or even just giving them out at your events or having them on hand after services.
Yeah.
And physical signage as well, having signs up outside your building, having your church name, having notice boards. These are still really effective communications methods, even if they're not quite as sexy to talk about as online, social media and that sort of thing. With your signage, think about who's passing by your church and think about what information they would need to see on the signage. We'll definitely cover some design tips in a future episode for these sorts of physical types of publicity. But I'd say unless people are regularly stopping by to read every word of your notice board content, make sure that you keep things simple. You should be able to read your signage from a good distance away as well. So cross the road and see if you can still read it. Do that the next time you're at your church building and pat yourself on the back if you can read it. But if not, then maybe it's time to update what's on there. And also, people should be able to consume the content and have a takeaway message, even just in a few seconds of having looked at your notice board or looked at your signage, without even having to break pace as they walk by.
Yeah.
So we've covered some of the main platforms there. There will always be newcomers. There will always be trends. Hopefully that's helpful to get you thinking about a few of them and where you can start out. But I just wanted to do a quick exercise on breaking down a platform and how you use it. And this is a question I've asked of people before when I've done comm strategy or training sessions with them. So we've said, please order the audience priority relating to the purpose of, let's say, your church website. And this order is actually something that someone gave as a response. So first of all, they put the most important person using their church website is a church member or a volunteer, someone who's really plugged in to the church. And then after that, a regular attendee, so a little bit less plugged in, but someone who comes often. Then they say next priority was a first-time visitor. After that, someone who's had some contact with the church but not necessarily come in. And then finally, as the lowest priority, someone who's had no previous contact with the church at all. And as I say, that's the order that they gave, but I don't know about you, I could definitely flip that order pretty much on its head.
Yep.
Maybe that's because I've spent too much time around evangelists, but generally speaking, my approach to church communications is that first of all, we should be reaching out to those that we don't know. That's a priority. And internal communication, reaching those who are already with us, is really important, but it's secondary to that outreach. So it might be that you land somewhere differently on this from me. You'll have to decide on your approach yourself. But that's part of making a communications plan, is having those discussions, having those brainstorming exercises. And I do just want to take a second here again to empathise and acknowledge that churches have a really hard job in doing this.
Yeah.
Because as much as the core message of the gospel is at the heart of everything we do, we are also trying to communicate a million different messages about different ministries and different groups and activities to an audience that basically is made up of everyone. So don't be discouraged if you find it difficult. It can be a difficult task, but we've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, definitely.
And so on to step 5, and that is organisation. How do you actually go about doing this? And because this is such a difficult, complex task, I'm going to hand over to Hannah.
Oh, thanks, Joe. Okay, so we've got our audience, we've got the things that we want to share, we've got the sort of the platforms that we think that we want to sort of focus on. Right, what do we actually do? Well, again, it's thinking and listing a couple more things, but who have you actually got on the team? Who have you got to help? So again, when the first things we said was about prayer and getting buy-in, who have you actually got supporting you in terms of gathering content, in terms of delivering, creating content? Is it just going to be you on your own, or have you got a couple people that you can not so much ask for help, but you know are on your team and that can help you in various different ways? And is that leadership team who do have a bit more of an incentive to create good quality content, or is it volunteers who maybe it's a little bit tricky to get them to engage consistently? But it doesn't matter who, just so long as you know. But also try to get new people involved. You know, this is a new area in terms of mission and ministry. Have you got a lot of creatives within your church family that don't really fit in with traditional ministry opportunities that you could go, well, you've got amazing photography skills, you know, you're an amazing poet and writer. Could you help write content for us? So know who you have to actually do the work. Is it you or is it a team? Then think about your budget. So actually what's realistic in terms of both equipment, software, hardware, what things have you actually got to use? Not so much as props, but what things have you got to hand to actually use? As lovely as it would be to think that we could do animated videos on Bible stories every week for the youth ministry, actually, is that feasible? A, have you got a team to do that? Have you got the resources to do that? Have you got the time to do that? I mean, that's amazing if you do, but likelihood is that most churches won't. So really think about what you've got to hand. If your computer's a little bit slower, you're probably not going to be doing a lot of video editing on it. If you've got someone in the church has got a camera and they're willing to take photos, that's brilliant. You've got that resource then that you can lean into.
And I think that's also something that can develop over time. So it might be that you haven't got a particularly powerful computer at the moment, and so video editing is a bit out of reach. But if you start off by making some videos on your phone and you think, actually, this is something that's worth reinvesting into, then the church can put some budget towards different hardware or whatever it is that you need to take that forward.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like the phones nowadays are, I think someone said once that most sort of modern day phones are more advanced than the computers that they sent the Apollo
Literally, like
rocket
my,
to or
my watch
something
is
like
more
that.
advanced than the moon landing computer. It's crazy.
London, yeah. So, I mean, we could do amazing things on phones. And so, yeah, don't think that you need to have all the fancy equipment to get started, because again, you won't know what you can do until you try it out. Then set aside time, both we're doing all of this stuff that we're talking about, but also make sure that you've got the time to do it. If you are already running admin, secretary, treasury, you're also cleaning the church, doing the flower rotas.
Maybe preaching on the Sunday as well.
Yeah, why not? Let's just add that on. I don't think you're going to have a lot of time to really fully invest in digital, social media, and doing comms well. So be realistic with the time that you have got to give, but equally, if you want to invest in it, make sure that you commit that time to it. Doing comms, social media, doing it, having a good website won't just happen on its own. You need to commit to it and commit to it regularly to build consistency in planning, creating, and engaging with your audiences. It doesn't need to take all the time in the world, but equally you do need to commit, otherwise it just won't be effective or useful or impactful, and then in a way you might as well just not bother. Sorry, that sounds really harsh.
Yeah, but I think that there is that element of, if you're going to do it, then do it well.
Yeah.
And like you say, it can take over your time. I've certainly been guilty of that in the past, where it will expand to the time that you give to it.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to be organised, to have a plan, to set things out. And also, to mention that there are some amazing tools out there which can help you save time. So choosing those tools wisely, and we'll give you a couple of examples, but noting them down so that you know they're the go-to things, that you don't have to think about it and have that mental strain each time. So if you're looking for some stock images, going to Unsplash or Pexels or Pixabay and knowing those are your go-to sites, you don't have to go and search out where you're going to find the images, but those can be the first places you look.
Yeah.
We talked in a previous episode about Canva and how amazing that is for creating graphics and brand content. We talked about Trello for organization.
Yeah.
There's also some amazing social media management tools out there. So these are tools from a third party rather than from the social media platform itself. But you can schedule content, you can reply to content that's coming in. And that means that rather than it having to take time every day, you can set stuff up in advance. So Hootsuite, Buffer, those are really good examples of that.
Yeah, definitely. Then actually, how do we plan out what we're going to say with all of this information then we've gathered? Now, I will really quickly go through this because I can actually spend a whole hour talking about this, and I normally do in my webinars. But the couple kind of like key plan templates that are, I think, most effective when planning out your content is to kind of start outwards and work your way in. So look sort of from the big picture of what's your year plan. Now, this doesn't have to be just for the church, and actually in a way it's better not to look too much in the church, but what are the big national, international, and even kind of like big local things happening? And that could be anything from the immovable objects like Christmas and Easter. They're happening. We're not changing the dates for that at all. For a national thing, thinking about Queen's funeral and the coronation then coming up. Are there any kind of big things? Football games, that's something that's actually some people are realizing at the moment. I think it's, I don't know what one, but there's a football game happening the same Saturday or Sunday night that most carol services are likely to be scheduled on, and suddenly churches are going, oh, right, we're going to have to change our plan for that. So having that broad view helps you then to work your way in as to what you're going to do without being suddenly shocked. Goodness, we're meant to be printing the flyers and suddenly we can't, we have to re-strategize everything because we've got to change the dates. And generally, actually, that one, you can take a lot of that and move for following years. So you have that as kind of an overall template year on year. Then go down to quarterly or seasonally. And this then is starting to look a bit more at your church. So work through sermon series that you're going to be looking at over the coming months. Are there any key church events? Again, carol services, Easter services, or any activities that are happening? Have you got any guest preachers or any particular events going on?
Perhaps fundraising campaigns.
Exactly. That's a really sort of key thing that needs to be factored in within your communications, because that's a campaign that doesn't just go out once, but will go out regularly. And if you haven't factored that in, suddenly your messaging can be all messy. But think about what's sort of going on through the church. So again, maybe it's not something that's happening directly in the building, but something that the church is doing, or kind of like by the church. Again, fundraising campaigns, maybe that's not something specific that's happening, but someone is doing activities to raise money for their local food bank, or something that's happening through the church. And this is useful for more than just sort of comms, but general church admin and logistics. So as you're starting to think, say Christmas, actually, when's the church getting decorated? Can you build content around that? But actually, that's really important for the cleaners to know, because they'll have to clean after the decoration's been done, because there's things all over the place. But it also means that worship practice can't happen that day, because there's loads of people in and out of the building and decorating. So actually having a kind of like, what is everything that's happening within the church? That's actually a really useful thing that so many churches don't do, and people don't know what's happening with other groups.
And it's that joined up thinking thing that we can learn from organisations that are doing it better, that might not be churches.
Exactly.
But they've got everything planned and on the same page, and everyone's aware of it, or at least they look like they do.
Yeah.
We can learn from that, and we can prepare ourselves better.
Exactly. And even if it doesn't directly impact you, at least you know that that's happening, and not going, oh, well, I never got told about that. And it's just knowing actually what's happening. Then go down again into monthly. So actually now this is starting to think, what are we going to be posting? Right, well, we've got a harvest service coming up. We're then going to be starting to think about half term and coming up to Christmas things. Right, these are the messages we need to be going out. These are the key things that we need to be highlighting. And you can start to think about what platforms they're vaguely going to be going on, and sort of how often you want to be repeating a message. So if we're coming up to, say, a harvest festival or a harvest service, you want donations for the food bank that you're going to be collecting for. So that's something that you want to share, going, please come along to our Sunday service and please bring something. XYZ is the things that we're trying to highlight. You then have the service and you've shared that, that's great. And then afterwards, it's great to have a picture of all of the food that's been collected, or if it's been money, to say we've raised this much money for this cause. Isn't that fantastic? So it's more than just, here's the Sunday service and that's it. You've got stuff going out beforehand that you want people to know about. You've got the thing itself, and then you've got a lovely message afterwards. If it's a carol service, obviously you want people to come along, please bring a donation of mince pies sort of the week before. We then got the service, that's lots of lovely content. And then afterwards, if you've raised money, or actually here are just some lovely photos and some clips of the service. And then even here's the playlist of the carols that we sung.
And I think, though we will often default to the online stuff here and thinking about that, it obviously has a knock-on on the offline stuff as well. So if you are having a carol service and you want to have some flyers in the seats that people can fill out and give back to you so you can get in touch with them, then that's going to have a lead time on it in terms of, working backwards from the date that you actually need to have them to hand out. They need to be printed, they need to be delivered to you. Before that, they obviously need to be designed. Before that, you need to decide what is going into them. So it has that knock-on effect. And I think that these are things which can often be missed when suddenly we realise it's 2 days to go until the carol service. Oh, we might want to have something to give out, but we haven't thought about it before now. At the very least, at that point, you realise that you've mucked up a little bit. Make a note of it for next year, put it into next year's plan and learn from it.
Yeah, exactly. So then zooming in into the fine nitty gritty bits of weekly. So this is be done like the week before, of literally going, right, what is going out and when is it going out on what platform? And that is literally where you pre-write out all your content. You know what links you're going to be sharing, you know what photos you're going to be sharing, and you know what and when it is going to be going out. And by doing this kind of like the week before, you can then schedule the majority of your content going out. So again, as we've said already, Buffer, Hootsuite are great examples. A lot of apps do have in-app scheduling, and it's a great relief to know that the stuff is prepared to go out. You don't have to think every, hour or whenever that, oh, I've got to post this out. But it's also being aware actually what's going out. I did see an example, unfortunately, the week that the Queen died, obviously everyone suddenly was having to create very reactionary content in this is hugely sad for the country, praying for the family and the nation and everything. And then I did see, I can't remember what it was, but some Channel 4 show that was about queens, and it literally said who's going to take the crown. I think it was some sort of like beauty contest or something, and it was, I mean, it was quite funny if it wasn't actually a really upsetting situation, like context. So be aware of what you've got going out and just make sure to go in. Don't just rely solely on scheduled content. Do be responsive, respond back to people's comments or shares, and engage with other platforms. And again, go in and check at the end of every day, right, has everything gone out that's meant to go out? There's been no hiccups, there's been no kind of like broken links or anything. So it does sound a lot of stuff to do, but actually, they're not all been done in one go, and a lot of them you can kind of template and reuse and repurpose and pull stuff across from one to the other.
Yeah, I think a couple of things to reflect on that. Responsive content, great. Remember that communications is a two-way street, so it's not just you blasting stuff out there, but if people are responding, then respond back and continue that conversation. And then the other thing is that this can all sound overwhelming. We've said it before, but actually, if the place where you start is that you want to schedule 3 or 4 posts a month on 1 or 2 platforms, that might be where you're at, and that's absolutely fine. And you can decide whether you want to build that up or not, but don't feel guilty about starting small.
Yeah, exactly.
So the last step that we've got for you is to document all of this and review it. So documenting it is really important. Hopefully you've got the point that this stuff that you're thinking about is worth writing down and having it in a format that you can easily read. But also, and this isn't really something to go within the strategy necessarily, but having a process for reviewing it. So coming back and saying, right, these were the goals. Have we met them? Are there things that we want to change? Are there things that we could do better? Are there things we need to stop doing, or other things that we need to start doing? As much as this plan that you've written down is going to be helpful for you, we hope and we pray, it's not something which is set in stone forever and that never changes.
Yeah.
It's there to make your job easier. So go back into your plan, review it, make changes, share it with others if you want to. Have people that you trust that can help you in reviewing it, and have that almost that accountability to each other. So we hope that this has all been really helpful for you. We hope that your comms plan does become a useful tool and a guide that you can use regularly. So just remember, don't try just to sell a Sunday. Share local news and celebrations, resources, ask questions, have some fun, and just be real with people. Because as much as you are usually posting on behalf of the church account, people are aware that it's a human behind it, and that's part of the interaction and the communication. And while we have the amazing news of Jesus, that doesn't mean that life doesn't have its challenges. And so we want to see churches using social, using digital, using even the offline publicity to show that church isn't just Sundays and is about all of life, and Jesus cares about all of that life. So be honest with people, be authentic, and we want to see you make the most of this amazing opportunity to be salt and light in a world that desperately needs Jesus.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. So as ever, if you have any suggestions or questions for us, or you just need a bit more clarity on these last 2 episodes or any other episodes, you can send us an email at hello@gppodcast.uk. And also, we'd love it if you wanted to share the podcast with other church leaders, or anyone else who might find this useful. We are available, as they say, everywhere you can find your local podcast, or you can easily share our website with all the details at www.gppodcast.uk. We will be back soon with a new episode.